is that their lives were not very interesting without some sacrificial push to it. Because there was no color. My life was so full of color because my internal world was full of questions and answers, and politics were just one part, and I had all these other things that I was into, and I did not want to sacrifice all of that for doing an act which it really was of questionable validity ultimately, though it was very impressive, and in the short run, for sure, it would excite a lot of people to hear that somebody did such and such radical act on that street. So,
well, I don't think you need to rationalize for me, or at least certainly not for most people, why you wouldn't risk 30 years in a dark cell. So.
Well, yeah, you see, it's a big risk too. I mean, let's face it, very few people are bent that way, and I think that those people either haven't thought of the consequences seriously enough, or their life is so without any purpose otherwise, so this gives them, it's like, you know, joining the Crusades type psychology. Not that there is anything wrong in what they ultimately did, but this is how I explain as perhaps one of the reasons I didn't do. Okay?
I would venture the hypothesis that they're quite probably very fearless people in some way to begin with, and who have not found any meaning or much meaning in their own life. And here is a way that they can suddenly become very meaningful and
exactly.
exercise this courageous aspect of their nature to begin with.
Exactly. I mean, there are many kids that I see in the United States today that get their high by being daredevils, you know, with the skateboards and things. Now, the same type of personality, instead of being applauded by, you know, just a small group of friends for the skateboarding act, it would be applauded by a whole nation for putting a bomb in you know, under the car of one of the military people and so forth. I mean, that's real. I mean, you want to be a daredevil, that's much more impressive to do, okay? It seems to me that there is something there. Anyway, it was people like that who pushed for the famous Polytechnic School event. That was a little after a few months after I had arrived in Greece, less than a year. It was 72 still, wasn't it? Yeah. And all of a sudden, in this terribly controlled society, the students took over the Polytechnic School of the University of Athens. And they had their own radio station, from which they played all the songs that were not allowed during the dictatorship, mainly the Theodorakis compositions. They said things that could not have been said before over the radio, that the radio station that they created. They had big placards with all kinds of good things to say, and it's very interesting that it was not just political, it became very cultural too, the Polytechnic. Feminist signs went up and what have you, even ecological. I think there was an ecological sign that I saw. So it was some kind of a outburst, of course, and they brought the tanks and they put it down. And I was there, present. Actually, earlier on during that day, I was teaching English at the time, and I was teaching my English classes and Greek, and I was teaching both languages, and I knew what was happening on the other side of town. We all knew. So what I did was I started teaching forbidden songs to my classes, and like the school principal was, you know, beside herself with fear of what I was doing. Okay, now I had to do that too. It was like my small participation in the disobedience.
How long was the Polytechnic going on?
3 days max. It did not last very long, but it was culminating, of course. I remember just before the Polytechnic days, We were in a taverna with friends, and of course the big thing was to go to tavernas and sing the forbidden songs. And that's the forbidden songs of Theodorakis. Theodorakis was an open communist, or rather a Euro-communist. And his songs were forbidden, so the thing to do was to sing his songs, just to show where you stand. So we used to do that a lot. It was a nice way to feel that we are on the side of justice. Okay. And the taverna owner knew us, knew what we were singing, and one day he told us, the moment we came in, be careful tonight because there's one of them here. He came to arrest you. And we sat down, we had our wine, and then a very, very sweet man came to our table and he said, are you going to say some of those beautiful songs tonight? I said, sure we will. And to his shock and dismay, we started singing Byzantine chants from the Greek Orthodox Church for the next 2 hours. He was so pissed. he didn't arrest anybody. So that was the atmosphere. It was this game to sing or not to sing the Theodorakis songs that lasted for a long time. And it's very funny. After that, I went back to the U.S. again for a couple of years, and when I returned, the dictatorship was still going on under not Papadopoulos but his successor Ioannidis. And then the dictatorship was over, okay, and Karamanlis came from Paris. And then I heard the same Theodorakis songs sung in the National Gardens on a Sunday afternoon as completely accepted and safe songs sung by a soprano of all things, accompanied by piano of all instruments. And I said, oh my God, where is the fervor? Where is the illegality? It's all gone now. It's part of the status quo.
It was no longer your private possession.
That's right. It no longer meant anything. There were whole families with their little kids, everybody singing along. It was like, I come from Alabama. It was zero. And you couldn't reclaim those songs again. But they were magic songs during the years of the dictatorship. What else?
Okay. I don't know if you wanted to tell about that experience at the protest.
Oh,
I mean, was that at Polytechnic, or was that?
It was those days. It was not just the Polytechnic day, not when the tanks came. It was just a few days. It was very hard to know where to walk at some point, because you would walk down a street, and because there were too many people walking, or the police suspected there were too many people crossing a certain street, they were afraid that was going to turn into a street protest, and they would start terrorizing people with their clubs. They would just hit people spontaneously without any reason. People that didn't look radical, I mean grandmas, you know what I mean? They started hitting anybody because they were really going crazy themselves. They were afraid that something would erupt here, something would erupt there. Do you know that the Greeks don't carry arms? I mean, give me a break. Is that dangerous? It's much more dangerous for the American cops to go now and bust rock houses here, because here is guns against bigger guns. Greeks didn't have any guns. So I don't know why they were so abusive, because people were essentially helpless. The only thing people could make were Molotov cocktails, but that was rare. It's, 5 of those per week. That's as much as the opposition could throw at the cops. Not a big deal. So in one of those events, we were just standing, not knowing which way to turn. Because if you ran, they thought that you were guilty of something. If you didn't run, so you would freeze. And there was a guy frozen next to me, and they just pushed him, and he fell like this, and his skull opened, and his brains fell out. Just next to me, it could have been me, for no reason at all. For no reason at all, just irrational hitting and pushing around. I'm sure that things have become better now, because some of the super fascist elements were cleaned out eventually, out of the police force and out of the military police too. So there was a time in Greece that Greeks had gotten so cynical about dictatorships coming after democracies that the saying was something like, during a democracy, they make democracy so that they can see who the radicals are, so that when they bring a dictatorship, they know who to arrest quickly without too much investigation. You know, so they give you a few years of democracy and you speak your mind, and then they know who you are, and that's the end when they get back. But you know, this is the extreme Greek cynicism that we don't have to buy. For a while now, it seems that Greece may have other problems, but I don't see it heading to a military dictatorship at the moment.
And so what, just to close on this, what brought the downfall of the dictatorship?
The downfall, I think that the downfall was brought, this is my view, okay, by the fact that international pressure was put on the American government to stop pushing for still another dictator in Greece. And possibly the United States did not have much to lose by allowing a right-wing government to take over in Greece. And because the thing with Cyprus had been completed, and then you can restore democracy. So if the primary thing was the Cyprus thing, it had been completed. There was no reason anymore to prolong dictatorship. If it were the what Paul Krasner says with, you know, as a test case, they had seen the results. There was no reason to continue it. This is how I see the transition to the right-wing government headed by Karamanlis. From that, going to the PASOK government, there is a little bit of distance, but I still believe that Greece has been pro-Washington all along, even under the present Papandreou government. In no way Greece has done anything about the American bases, just talk. And we are still in NATO. Karamanlis, when he came back, immediately after the dictatorships, took Greece out of NATO, militarily, from the military part of NATO for a little while, and that was detrimental to the country, because when we had to return, we returned with an imbalance of power vis-a-vis Turkey. So now we are in NATO, and we do keep the American bases the way they were. So I don't see any signs of Greek foreign policy being anti-American after the dictatorship. It's all been pro-American, despite the talk, of course. Andreas Papandreou has talked a lot, you know, in an anti-American tone. But the two things, the basis and being parts of NATO, being part of NATO, he has done nothing about it. We are a pro-American nation, really, deep down, despite the anti-American feeling you find here and there.
Well, he certainly rallied some votes, though, with his talk, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Well, there are some people who even say that Papandreou was used by the American government as a, how should I put it, so that they could do their job better. In other words, you need somebody who talks against Washington, okay, so that the people in the country feel that, oh God, now we'll let them have it. But none of the essential things are happening. So everybody gets their anger out. They say, now we are really showing them who we are. Nothing is happening. That's the best way to get things done, is to convince people that something is happening when nothing is happening, rather than to have somebody there who is clearly pro-American. Then you really ignite the anger of the opposition.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it.
It's my private little analysis.
Well, it's public now. No. Okay. Well, okay, if somebody were to say, what kind of traditional music or folk music do we have in Greece? What would be something you would? How would you respond to that? If someone wanted to know what's considered the people's music or popular music or folk music in Greece.
Well, there's nothing that gets excluded from this kind of definition. I mean, when you say people's music, then it's all people. Traditional music means that we have to go back a little bit, music that's older, right?
Okay, well, I'm looking for that which includes the music played on the islands, the music played in the mountains, the music played in the cities, that is not a music that is strictly upper class music like classical, or perhaps even church music might be more limited to.
Okay, let's see what we have in Greece. We have the church music, we have classical music, we have contemporary music, meaning the weird contemporary music, atonal and what have you. We have some rock composed by Greeks. We have the so-called light music, which is basically tangos and waltzes without using a bouzouki as a basic instrument. Then we have the so-called light pop, elafrolaika, which utilizes bouzouki and baglama, but basically it is much lighter in feeling, and sometimes the beats are European or South American. Then you get a heavier bouzouki type music, and that's the rebetika, and the successor to the rebetika, the archondorebetika, which are more fancy. Then what else do you get? Then you get strictly foreign music, and there are many kids today in Greece who don't want to hear Greek music of any kind, and they're into Elton John and what have you. Now, on top of all that, you have folk music. Folk music is the music of the provinces. That's the best definition for folk music, not of the cities. And that could be Crete, or could be Evris, could be any place. And those tunes, of course, are much more ancient than the more modern ones. You could call those traditional. Now, in the beginning of this century and the end of the previous century, a few urban centers developed their own music, urban music, with bouzouki and baglama, and baglama came a little later, and a few other instruments, the rebetiki music.
So that's the rebetiki music.
Yeah,
rebetiki music, as you say.
Is urban music, composed basically in the city. I mean, there are roots in the countryside too. We have paintings, not too many, but we have paintings, even murals in churches, where you see something similar to bouzouki. The tamburas is one of the instruments that looks like a bouzouki. But it was the end of the previous century and the beginning of this century that the cities became big to begin with. and they produce their own form of art. It's like the blossoming of the city. And because of the nature of Greeks to complain or to express tragedy, and also because those cities were quite tragic, considering all the things that one knows about leaving the village and going to the city for work and not finding work is the classical situation which happened to other countries at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of this one. We had it in Greece too, and of course that's very tragic, and you get a lot of sorrow. Basically the rebetiki musiki is sorrow about fate, unrequited love, and problems because you're a high smoker and there are some laws against it and so forth. These are the basic things. There are other things too, successful love, but it's a minority, you know.
And who are these people? And
the social carriers of this music, the types of people that wrote and listened to this music, performed and listened to this music, was in the very beginning the lumpen proletariat, the unemployed, the semi-employed, and that included the prisoners in prisons, sailors, and prostitutes, and their pimps. And just because somebody would be playing the bouzouki doesn't mean that you would not be pimping on the side. Again, I'm not against prostitution. I'm not against smoking hashish, so I'm not particularly judgmental myself toward the social habits of the society that we are talking about. It was not a very worker mentality-oriented society, culture, subculture, rather. In other words, the idea was not to save money to buy the house. The idea was, do I have money? What is the most extravagant thing I can do to have the weekends? And then Monday you start from zero again. It's a very heroic type of living, if you see what I mean. It's a heroism in the context of hedonism, of course. And it contains a lot of goodness. Because life is such a big joke, you're not hoarding, and therefore you're not you don't have the hoarder mentality. Because you see yourself as a, how can I put it? You see yourself as a constant bum, even though you have money today. If you see yourself as a constant bum, you're a nicer person, because I think you are, in a sense, like a sage of sorts. You know, not the sage who renounces sexuality and never tries mind-altering substances, but the sage that does the other stuff as well. So, without over-idealizing the pimp sages, without saying that I would like to have a father who, along with my mother, would have a couple of other mistresses, and disappear at nights and not simply smoke hash, but also play cards and so forth. Not saying that I envy every part of that culture. In a way, it is a very attractive culture in many ways, especially compared to its alternative, which was a very strict Greek Orthodox culture, the village. Or in the city, it was probably a very anti-hedonistic, opera-worshipping bourgeoisie. So I don't know that those are better paradigms of living, you know.
So this was something of a rebellious lifestyle.
Yeah, they were quite rebellious. You know, the Constitution Square in Athens, in the turn of the century, just imagine the rebetes sitting around and smoking their hookahs, and every time a carriage passes with the rich people going to the opera, just imagine them running after the carriage and throwing tomatoes. I mean, that's the scene at the Constitution Square, beginning of the century. So those are the people who initially composed and loved that music. And it is true that their biggest enemy, other than the church, it was the middle class. Because they had friends in the high classes. There were people from the high class who would go to the hash dens of the rebetes. Because you see, high class is above the law, the way the lumpen is below the law. And then there's the law in between. So they met there, and they had some kind of an encounter. But anyway, when morning came, the rebetes was broke again, and the rich, of course, returned to their mansions. So that's how it began. I said that they had some good qualities. The rebetes had very good qualities in terms of sharing. If you had money, you would share with others, and that was the ethic. It's like the ethic of the street people too, because the next day you won't have any. So you have very much that sharing of resources whenever resources are available. So that creates a lot of good Christianity right there. However, it is not the Christianity of the church, because the Christianity of the church, especially of the Greek Orthodox Church, has only very rarely, I'll put my hand on the fire, it was only during the Second World War that the Greek Orthodox Church showed nobility, and it did, helping people. Other than that, it has done much less, I think, than the Catholic Church in terms of service to society, practical service to society, not just during confession. So, the rebetes thought of the clergy as very inferior people, in fact. I don't know if I've told you this before. It was considered very bad luck to see a priest early in the day. It was like seeing a black cat, same idea. And in fact, a rebetes man would touch his testicles as a way to protect himself from the evil that he just saw walk down the street. I think that gesture right there says everything about their relationship with the Greek Orthodox Church.
You said a rebetes man. Was it something that women?
Yeah, well, that would be a rebetisa. Yeah, because
but there is such a thing then.
Oh yes, of course. The women of the rebetes, or the mangues, whatever word you want to use, were not the wife types. Many of them were artists, and others were prostitutes, and they had several boyfriends. They were polygamous. One of the greatest rebetica singers and composers, Marcos Vamvakaris, a man who left us a great...
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, that's oh, much better. Marcos Vamvakaris.
Yeah, Marcos Vamvakaris was in love with a woman who was polygamous, and half of his songs are about the tragedy of that, and he used to go under her door and watch her make love to others. Tragic as it may sound, that made him compose some great stuff. Άταχτη